This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. One of my favorite artists, Roger Waters. Such a sharp thinker, a man of contrasts, a man that's not afraid to say how things really are. I love that about him. Today, I want to talk about the death of trend following. For those of you out there with a modicum of intelligence, you know that trend following doesn't work. It's dead. It will never work. It can't work. The only thing you can do is to trust the system. Buy and hold. And eat your applesauce. That's life. In all seriousness, I saw another comment the other day about trend following being dead. A guy that seemingly had some intelligence, some understanding of trading systems, perhaps some understanding of trend following. But I always find it unusual that when people say they understand trend following and they're using the Sharpe ratio to back up their points, I tend to tune out. I tend to think maybe this person's really not with it. But this chap has an audience of some sort. He made this comment, and it got me thinking about trend following and the big picture of trend following. Trend following is very efficient. It's very economical. We accept as fact that we do not know what will happen tomorrow. We don't know which market will generate the next big move. No one knows that. So you make the allocations as you can. You make your bets. And you run the system. And you see what the markets give you. That simple idea, that simple strategy has been shown to work for centuries. It's not new. It's not radical. It's only new and it's only radical to those of you that have been indoctrinated. I tend to think that the people that would say trend following is dead are the same people that support the museums that have pictures of dinosaurs and man standing next to each other. It requires the same level of intelligence. If you say trend following is dead, more than likely, you like to go to museums where you could see dinosaurs and man standing next to each other. But I thought today that I would widen this out from the subject of trading, because trend following is used in many other fields. Whether it's the pharmaceutical field, a new drug, whether it's venture capital, betting on those many horses and not knowing which one will win. And speaking of horses, horse racing, risk management, bet sizing, it's all right in horse racing. It's all part of blackjack. Good poker, same type of thinking, same bet strategy. Get the big winners and don't worry about the small losers, because you're going to cut those small losers and not let them become big losers. This applies to the music industry. Do you think when an artist has been signed over the last 50 years, that recording company knew that a particular artist was going to be successful, was going to be huge? Of course not. That's why they sign many that you've never heard of. We hear the famous ones, from Elvis to Nirvana. We don't hear about all the ones that failed. And the failures are far more significant in numbers than the winners. But those winners can be so damn big that they pay for everything. This thinking of having many small losers and a few big winners really works well in the film industry, making movies, financing movies. It works extremely well. And there's proof. I caught some excerpts the other day from an NPR piece. Someone forwarded it to me. I can't really admit to listening to NPR. The voices drive me crazy. The people talking in this episode drive me crazy. There's some kind of I don't know what they've done to themselves, but they don't sound like real people. But let me play these excerpts with some commentary around.
And when you rank movies by the return on investment, how much money went into making a film compared to how much profit it created, Jason Blum's name is on 6 of the top 20 films made in the last 5 years. Blum has developed a whole philosophy about how to make money in show business. And he figured it out when he saw an early cut of this little film called Paranormal Activity.
All right, we're operational, babe. Ooh, sweet.
Paranormal Activity is the story of a couple that is trying to record ghosts in their own home. Basically, the whole thing looks like a home movie.
I just want you to know that if things progress or get worse in any way, I don't want to mess with the camera stuff anymore. I don't want to make it mad.
Blum saw the film and he decided to buy it, become the producer, find distribution. And he did this because it was scary, but mostly because it was cheap.
Paranormal Activity cost less than a used Toyota Camry.
It initially cost $15,000.
$15,000? How do you make a movie for $15,000?
You have no crew. So you have one person, and one person does everything. Oren, in his case, he had his girlfriend and his friend Amir. There were 3 of them, but that was the whole crew. There was no sound, there was no makeup, there was no wardrobe, there was no one.
But I mean, how do you even afford fake blood for $15,000?
$15,000 is a lot. Fake blood is like $4. I mean, come on, you go to the store, you buy fake blood, it's $4.
Paranormal Activity was basically the polar opposite of the Fast and the Furious.
There were no car chases, no explosions, no computer-generated monsters, nothing.
Paranormal Activity made $200 million. In all of film history, no film has ever made a bigger return on investment.
And this got Blum thinking. I mean, sure, not every movie could be as big a hit as Paranormal Activity, and you can't really make lots of movies for $15,000. But what if you created a system that made lots of really cheap movies? I mean, some would be flops, but who cares? They're cheap. And once in a while, you'd get a little of that paranormal magic, a certifiable hit. And when you did, you would make a fortune. Blum basically looks at films the way a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley looks at startups. He decided, I'm going to make lots and lots of little bets and then let the market figure out who the big winners are.
But to make this work, Blum had to fight every instinct of every Hollywood director. He had to force them to stop spending money, which is hard because all the kinds of standard Hollywood stuff is just off limits.
Great movie, you love the movie, but the climactic scene is a giant explosion. It brings down a building.
Not impossible, no. But if there was no way to end your movie without seeing the big explosion of a building falling down on screen, not for us. We have to pass.
Airplane crash?
Again, if you have to see it, I can hear someone talk about an airplane crash, no problem. I could see a burning wing, no problem. I could see ripped seats after the fact, no problem. The actual airplane going down, not a jet. A prop plane we could do.
Car chase through a city.
We've done them, but they do not, it looks nothing like Fast and Furious, I'll tell you that. It's a very, 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 very different version of that.
Blum set up a production company, Blumhouse, and they started to churn out movies, horror movies and thrillers, and some names you might have heard of. There's Insidious, Sinister, The Purge.
And there are also probably films you have never heard of, like Stretch and Area 51. There's really almost no way for you to know they even exist because they were never advertised. They were never released in theaters. About 40% of Blum's movies go basically nowhere, straight to video or like buried in Netflix somewhere.
40% is a lot of movies. That's like half of his movies fail. That's incredible.
That's his formula, right? But half are these huge outsized hits, at least in terms of the return. So this is the man who is totally at peace with flops, Mr. Anti-Big Budget Blockbuster.
They're fascinated because they can't imagine a statistically based style of thinking. They are so preoccupied with narrative, with a story, with being able to supposedly predict the future, that if somebody walks in the door and says, look, here's a way to make films where we're going to fail, they can't understand that a Jason Blum can walk in the door and say, look, here's how we make films, 50% failure rate, and we make a fortune. The NPR hosts have to dumb it down for their audience. They have to make it seem like this is something special. It's not special. It's not special to me. It's not special to many people that I know. It's not special to the many people that have been on my podcast. It's just sound, smart, statistically based thinking, execution, decision making. It's wise. Now, I give this producer the utmost credit. All the props to him for looking at the filmmaking industry and saying, hey, I'm a trend following trader, but in films. Let me play another short segment.
Jason Blum has this low-budget movie-making thing down to a science. He has a series of rules.
Should I give you the 3 rules of how to make a cheap movie?
Yeah, I want the 3 rules.
Okay, the 3 rules are not too many speaking parts.
There is a different pay scale for people who speak in a movie and people who don't.
Extras are union, and extras are paid, I think they're paid $80 or $100 a day. Now, the funny thing is, if an extra speaks, you have to pay an additional $400. So you'll notice, and not just in our movies, but definitely in our movies too, like when the waiter doesn't say anything or like this post office clerk doesn't say anything, there's a reason, because as soon as they do say something, you got to give them a check for $500. So you don't want extras to talk because it really costs you.
And then there's rule number 2.
Not too many locations. The most economical way to shoot a movie location-wise is to have it take place all inside a house. And you will notice a lot of our movies, in fact, do. But I would also say that that's where you're most vulnerable.
Oh, right, because it's your house and you think you're protected in there.
You know, except when there's a ghost who possesses your girlfriend or your boyfriend's a psychopathic killer.
Except then.
And there is rule number 3. This is probably the most important rule. And it's that stars, directors, producers, all of your talent, you pay them as little as it is legally possible to pay them. Blum says when you work on one of his movies, you're not really an employee. You're more like an investor, a partner. And if the movie profits, you profit.
So what we do is we have box office bonuses. So if you have made $1 million on a movie in the last 2 years up front, I say to you, if the movie makes X amount of money, we're going to get you to your $1 million. If it makes beyond that, we'll get you more than $1 million.
What's so wise about that segment is the efficiency direction. His desire for efficiency, his desire to cut costs, his desire to cut information. You want to be a fundamental trader and you want to be honest with me? You can never know all the fundamentals. So which fundamentals do you pick? Do you pick all of them? Well, it's impossible to have all of them. I look at what he's doing from a producing film standpoint, very similar to trend following traders saying, we don't need the fundamentals. It's all about efficiency. What's the most efficient you can be at your profession? Worry about costs. If you cut out the desire for fundamental information, you are left with the efficiency of simply trading the price action. That's it. You don't have to know anything else. Knowing something else costs something. Knowing something else has a price tag to it. It's not free. It takes your time. It takes your money. And your certainty doesn't necessarily go up or get any better than simply trading the price action. And of course, I would argue the price action is more certain. It's the only certain thing that we have. One more small clip from the segment.
Blum actually has a 4th rule for cheap movie making. and it's ironclad. And it's this: never, ever break your budget. Never try to spend your way out of a problem. Economists actually write about this idea. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. Often, companies and people who have spent a lot of money or a lot of time on something, they're more likely to continue plowing resources into that project even when it's a complete disaster. The sunk cost fallacy, it drives big budget movies in Hollywood.
But the Blum way says, spend your budget, not a penny more, and if the film fails, it fails. There'll be another one. In fact, Blum had 10 movies in the pipeline for this year already. He expected 4 of them to fail.
The sunk cost fallacy, otherwise known as risk management, otherwise known as a smart way to be. Perhaps the only thing that I picked up in an MBA program was the notion of a sunk cost. Yes, I always understood the sunk cost deep in my bones, but once you get the idea that if it's spent, it's gone, you are light years ahead of the competition. Light years ahead of the competition. Because most of the competition wants to imagine that there is no such thing as a sunk cost. You spent the money? Oh, don't worry, we'll spend more. You spent the money? Oh, don't worry, it will all turn around and magically come back to us like we really imagined in the beginning. It's fantasy. It's Fantasy Island. I love Tattoo. Whenever I think of insanity, I think of Tattoo. You want to avoid the mental energy needed to accept what a sunk cost is? Please, my friends, give up now. Give your assets to some broker who will fee you to death. You will get the buy and hold. If you happen to retire in the middle of a 50% drawdown on the S&P, well, that's what you get. That's what you wanted. That's exactly what you wanted. If you wake up in the middle of your retirement, after trusting the system for 30 or 40 years to supposedly deliver for you security, and you wake up when you're 70 years old or 75 years old, and you don't have what you expected to have, that's all on you. Not only is it your fault, I would argue it's what you wanted. You wanted to be that person. You wanted to be that person in need, in desperation, and to have no control. Because early in your life, you made bad decisions. And now, later in your life, you're at the mercy of the machine. All props to NPR for having that segment. You can go listen to the full thing at NPR. I only chose a few little slugs from it. It's a little too extended for me. I try to pick just the sections that make my points, frankly, the most pertinent points. Being a winner 50% of the time can make you a lot of money. As long as you bet on the winning horse, get rid of the losing horses, and you can have a nice life. But I'm the first one to admit this is not necessarily easy to accept. We have many influences, many things that come down upon us that don't want us to accept the very simple logic behind why Jason Blum has made a fortune making films as he does. One of the reasons that Jason Blum makes films like he does is because the rest of the system has this faulty notion of prediction and forecasting, and the rest of the system thinks they can see tomorrow. I want to read a few excerpts from the author Michael Crichton. These excerpts happen to be from 2005. They are timeless. Do we all agree that nobody knows what the future holds? Or do I have to prove it to you? I ask this because there are some well-studied media effects which suggest that simply appearing in media provides credibility. There was a well-known series of excellent studies by Stanford researchers that have shown, for example, that children take media literally. If you show them a bag of popcorn on a television set and ask them what will happen if you turn the TV upside down, The children say the popcorn will fall out of the bag. This result would be amusing if it were confined to children, but the studies show that no one is exempt. All human beings are subject to this media effect, including those of us who think we are self-aware and hip and knowledgeable. Media carries with it a credibility that is totally undeserved. You have all experienced this in what I call the Murrah-Gell-Mann amnesia effect. I refer to it by this name because I once discussed it with him, and by dropping a famous name, I imply a greater importance to myself and to the effect than it would otherwise have. Briefly stated, the Gell-Mann amnesia effect is as follows. You open the newspaper to an article on some subject you know well. In Murrah's case, physics. In mine, show business. You read the article and see the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. Often the article is so wrong, it actually presents the story backward, reversing cause and effect. I call these the wet streets cause rain stories. Papers are full of them. In any case, you read with exasperation or amusement the multiple errors in a story, and then turn the page to a national or international affairs story and read it as if the rest of the newspaper was somehow more accurate about Palestine than the baloney you just read. You turn the page and forget what you know. This is the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. I'd point out it does not operate in other arenas of life. In ordinary life, if somebody consistently exaggerates or lies to you, you soon discount everything they say. In court, there is the legal doctrine of falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, which means untruthful in one part, untruthful in all. But when it comes to the media, we believe against evidence that it is probably worth our time to read other parts of the paper, when in fact it almost certainly isn't. The only possible explanation for our behavior is amnesia. Continuing in Crichton's article, I remind you there is a new kind of specialist occupation. I refuse to call it a discipline or a field of study. It's called futurism. The notion here is that there is a way to study trends and know what the future holds. That would indeed be valuable if it were possible, but it isn't possible. Futurists don't know any more about the future than you or I. Read their magazines from a couple years ago, and you'll see an endless parade of error. Continuing. Some of you are old enough to remember Art Buchwald's famous column from the days of the Johnson administration. Buchwald wrote a "Thank God we don't have Barry Goldwater" essay, recalling how everyone feared Goldwater would get us into a major war. So we elected Johnson, who promptly committed 200,000 troops to Vietnam. That's what happens when you choose the dovish candidate. You get a war. Or you elect the intellectually brilliant Jimmy Carter and watch as he ends up personally deciding who gets to use the White House tennis courts. Or you elect Richard Nixon because he can pull the plug on Vietnam and he continues to fight for years and then opens China. You see, no one knows what will happen tomorrow. That's why that financing of films process that Blum uses is so effective. That's why trend following is so effective. That's why if I go back to the beginning of this podcast, for those people that want to say trend following is dead, you're saying something more than that. You're saying human nature has changed. You're saying the markets are efficient. People are efficient. There is absolutely no evidence of that. One last segment from Michael Crichton. I'd remind you that while there are some things we cannot know for sure, there are many things that can be resolved and indeed are resolved. Not by speculation, however, by careful investigation, by rigorous statistical analysis. Since we're awash in this contemporary ocean of speculation, we forget that things can be known with certainty and that we need not live in a fearful world of interminable, unsupported opinion. But the gulf that separates hard fact from speculation is by now so unfamiliar that most people can't comprehend it. To bring that back to film financing, yes, the major studios with the massive budgets that do not get the return on the dollar that Blum gets will think they can predict, will think they can forecast. They will show you all the spreadsheets that demonstrate supposedly how much said film will make. And when it bombs and they lose $100 million, they don't change. That's the process. It doesn't change for the big institutions. It doesn't change for the mass of humanity. My podcast is only useful for those that want to look at the world from a different vantage, an alternative angle, a perspective not yet thought about. So the question that you might have right now is why? Why can't so many of us accept something as simple as the notion of venture capital financing, of film financing, music financing, trend following financing? Same, as they say in Asia. It's all the same. What's going on inside of our minds that we can't wrap around this logic, this reason, this rationale that makes so much good sense on paper? Now, of course, Michael Crichton outlines the media and how the media can drive so much of how people come to understand information, to understand concepts, to understand reality. But psychologically, there's much more going on. One of my favorite guests was a guy named Bob Seawright. He writes a blog called Above the Market. He recently outlined investors' 10 most common behavioral biases. I would like to read those. These are exactly the why reason. Number 1, confirmation bias. We like to think that we carefully gather and evaluate facts and data before coming to a conclusion, but we don't. Instead, we tend to suffer from confirmation bias and thus reach a conclusion first. Only thereafter do we gather facts and see those facts in such a way as to support our preconceived conclusions. When a conclusion fits with our desired narrative, so much the better, because narratives are crucial to how we make sense of reality. Number 2, optimism bias. This is a well-established bias in which someone's subjective confidence in their judgments is reliably greater than their objective accuracy. Indeed, we live in an overconfident Lake Wobegon world, quote, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all of our children are above average, end quote. We are only correct about 80% of the time when we are 99% sure. I think you get the point. Number 3, loss aversion. We are highly loss averse. Empirical estimates find that losses are felt between 2 and 2.5 times as strongly as gains. Thus, the disutility of losing $100 is at least twice the utility of gaining $100. Of course, from a math standpoint, this is insanity. It also gets at the sunk cost notion. Number 4, self-serving bias. Our self-serving bias is related to confirmation bias and optimism bias. Self-serving bias pushes us to see the world such that the good stuff that happens is my doing, while the bad stuff is always someone else's fault. I bring this back to trend following for a moment. If I get a loss, I take my loss. Whose fault is it? Who knows? The market does what the market wants to do. I can only respond in kind. I can take my steps. I can't blame anyone. Number 5, the planning fallacy. In his terrific book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, who's appeared on this show, outlines what he calls the planning fallacy. It's a corollary to optimism bias and self-serving bias. Most of us overrate our own capacities and exaggerate our abilities to shape the future. The planning fallacy is our tendency to underestimate the time, cost, and risks of future actions, and at the same time, overestimate the benefits thereof. Self-explanatory. Perfect sense. Logical. But you could be damn straight, it's one of the many reasons that the masses, the big populations, can never accept the financing of films, venture capital, music, blackjack, poker, or trend following. They're just never going to accept it. Number 6, choice paralysis. Intuitively, the more choices we have, the better. However, the sad truth is that too many choices can lead to decision paralysis due to information overload. For example, participation in 401k plans among employees decreases as the number of investable funds offered increases. We are readily paralyzed by too many choices. I've seen Malcolm Gladwell talk about spaghetti sauce. Right? Walk into the supermarket. How many different types of spaghetti sauce are there now? Now, clearly for the company, they're making more money. But for us, the end user, do we really need 500 different types of spaghetti sauce? Number 7, herding. We all run in herds, large or small, bullish or bearish. Institutions herd even more than individuals in that investments chosen by one institution predict the investment choices of other institutions by a remarkable degree. Even hedge funds seem to buy and sell the same stocks at the same time and track each other's investment strategies. That affinity fraud is so common is definitive evidence of herding. Hey, herding can be a great thing though too. Herding is the opportunity to benefit. If the masses, if the big parts of the population are just herding and they're pushing some market along and it's becoming a great trend and they think it's going to go up forever and they have no stop loss and they're not planning to get out, well, that's great for you as a trend following trader because you know that markets don't go up forever or go down forever. So you always have a way to get out. Number 8, we prefer stories to analysis. As noted above, narratives are crucial to how we make sense of reality. They help us to explain, understand, and interpret the world around us. They also give us a frame of reference we can use to remember the concepts we take them to represent. Perhaps most significantly, we inherently prefer narrative to data, often to the detriment of our own understanding. Keeping one's analysis and interpretation of the data reasonably objective, since analysis and interpretation are required for data to be actionable, is really, really hard, even in the best of circumstances. A corollary to this problem and to confirmation bias is what Nassim Taleb calls the narrative fallacy, looking backward and creating a pattern to fit events and constructing a story that explains what happened along with what caused it to happen. Man, we see this every day. I only read these. 2 more to go. I only read these because this is the foundation for why you should be smiling. It's the foundation for why you should be happy. Because these 10 things are not going to change in your lifetime for the mass of the population. People are not going to read these and go, oh yeah, I'm going to change. No, not going to happen. As much as we tell people about behavioral finance, they're not going to change. Frankly, who wants them to change? I like the idea that there's big trends that come out of nowhere with all kinds of lemmings on board with no exit strategy. That's fantastic. It's a zero-sum game. I need dumb people to be doing dumb things to make easy money. Well, I'm not going to exactly call it easy, but I need dumb people to do dumb things to make money. That's what the markets are all about. Now, people will say, oh, come on, Mike, the markets are not about that. The markets are about efficiently allocating resources to the best uses of those capital to help society move forward. Look, man, we can only worry about ourselves, our friends, our family. We are not the world. It's all one big game, one big board game of Monopoly or Risk. That's what this is. I'm not sitting back pretending to be a world leader or some geopolitical expert. I'm simply saying there are ideas, there are ways to go about profiting in whatever walk of life you are encountering. Again, why I've talked about film financing today is because it directly correlates with trend following financing. Number 9, recency bias. We are all prone to recency bias, meaning that we tend to extrapolate recent events into the future indefinitely. For example, look at the last 5 or 6 years. Super low interest rates. The Fed apparently has everything under control. That must mean that it will all go that way forever. No interest rates, perfect Fed actions, a stock market that always goes up, and everyone is happy. You want that bet? You want to make that bet? Nah. Number 10, the bias blind spot. I've written many times about the cognitive biases which plague us and make it difficult for us to make good choices, including, obviously, here. Knowing about them is imperative if we're going to deal with them. We would always be wise to factor in these biases when performing analysis and making decisions. Unfortunately, we all tend to share a biased blind spot, the inability to recognize that we suffer from the same cognitive distortions that plague other people. Well, that's true. I'm not sitting here today in this podcast and pretending to be perfection. There is no such thing. But if there is no perfection, and there is no prediction, and there is no forecasting, and all we have is uncertainty, what will you do to deal with uncertainty? Specifically, what will you do to deal with uncertainty? Jason Blum finances films with a very specific method to deal with uncertainty. Precision method to deal with uncertainty. Primarily revolving around protecting his capital because he doesn't have unlimited capital. And knowing that there will be unforeseen big trends that will come along to make up and pay for all those bombs that don't work out. All these years later, I still love that simple concept. And so for those people out there that write the articles that talk about trend following is dead, they're just selling you something. I don't know what they're selling you. They're not being objective. If you want objectivity, go read all of the white papers from David Harding's firm, from Larry Height's firm, from Martin Luke's firm, from Keith Campbell's firm, from Bill Dunn's firm. Before you discount, before you say something is dead, that it doesn't work, at least take the time to show that you've done the homework. And then you won't have a guy like me make an entire podcast to just rip the crap out of you. Isn't that the great thing about the internet today? You have no cover. You don't just get to be at some big magazine, at some big TV show, and just pontificate with no chance that somebody will call you out. Calling you out is what I do for a living. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.